She was 3 steps from the table when she heard the lie. Not a rumor. Not a misunderstanding. A clean, deliberate, surgical lie, delivered in one language and dressed up as something completely different in another. Amara Osei didn't slow down. Didn't blink. Didn't let a single muscle in her face betray what her brain had just registered. She set the glass of sparkling water down at table 11, smiled at no one in particular, and walked away like a woman who had heard absolutely nothing. That was the skill you developed fast at Chateau Soleil, Houston's most exclusive members, only dining room perched on the 52nd floor of the Meridian Tower, overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city like a kingdom that didn't want to be found. You learned to move through rooms where billions of dollars changed direction over appetizers. You learned to keep your face a locked door. You learned, above everything, to never let anyone at the table know what you understood. Amara had been keeping that particular secret for 8 months. Now, before we go any further, if you have ever been in a room where you understood something nobody knew you understood, where you watched something wrong happen and felt that slow, burning pull in your chest, do I say something or do I walk away? This story is going to land somewhere deep in you. Stay with me. Because what Amara did next didn't just change her life. It changed the entire direction of a deal worth more than most people will ever see in 10 lifetimes. Drop a comment right now. Would you have said something? Hold that answer. By the end of this, you might not be so sure you know yourself as well as you think. Table 17 at Chateau Soleil was not a regular table. It wasn't even on the floor plan that new servers were handed during orientation. It existed in a private alcove behind a corridor of smoky glass and matte black steel, a room within a room, separated from the main dining floor by temperature, by silence, and by a level of discretion that cost more per year than most people earned. Reservations for Table 17 went through a different channel entirely. No online system. No waiting list. Just a name, a call, and an understanding. Amara had been assigned there exactly 3 times in 8 months. Each time, Gerald, her floor manager, had told her the same thing in different words. Be present. Be invisible. Don't exist unless you're needed. Tonight, she existed less than usual. There were 4 men at Table 17. She'd clocked them the moment she walked in, the way she always clocked every table, cataloguing quickly and filing it away. First, a heavy-set man in his 60s, American, Texas money, the kind that comes from land and oil and doesn't feel the need to announce itself anymore because it has been announcing itself for generations. His name, she would learn later, was Whitfield Crane. He sat at the head of the arrangement like a man who assumed all tables were automatically his. Beside him, a younger man, early 30s, the kind of handsome that had been carefully managed and expensively maintained. Too smooth. The kind of smile you recognize not because it's charming but because you've seen it before. In every room where someone was being sold something they didn't know they were buying. His name was Marcus Devereaux, listed on the evening's reservation as legal counsel and liaison. Across from them, still, composed, carrying that particular quality of stillness that doesn't come from rest but from discipline, Park Ji-won. Amara had noticed him before she noticed any of the others. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, Korean, dressed in a deep navy suit so precisely fitted it looked architectural rather than tailored. He moved through the room when he arrived with the unhurried certainty of a man who understood that the room had already adjusted itself to accommodate him before he walked through the door. His associate, a compact, watchful man named Shin, who said nothing and missed nothing, had positioned himself near the private entrance and hadn't moved since. Ji-won ordered still water with a specific Korean brand name. Marcus translated it to Amara without looking up. She wrote it down and walked away. That should have been it. Just another invisible moment in an invisible shift. Except that as she moved toward the service corridor, the 4th man at the table, a contract attorney named Gottfried Huber, Swiss, silver-haired, the kind of precise that comes from decades of reading documents for a living, muttered something under his breath in German. She didn't stop walking. But her mind stopped completely. The indemnity clause is structured to reverse in their favor. This is not what was agreed. Amara kept moving. Set the tray down. Steadied her hands. and thought about what no one at table 17 could possibly know about the woman who had just refilled their water. 8 months ago, Amara Osei was not a server. She was a senior certified interpreter at the Osei Marchetti Language Group, a boutique firm she had co-founded in Houston's Galleria district, specializing in high-stakes international negotiations, legal proceedings, corporate acquisition talks, trade agreement frameworks between companies operating across languages where a single mistranslated clause could detonate a deal or, worse, detonate a career. She had been fluent in 6 languages since her late 20s: English, German, French, Chui, Mandarin, and Japanese. The last 2 learned through obsessive self-discipline during a period of her life when she had decided that being good wasn't enough and being excellent wasn't either. She had interpreters who worked under her. She had a client list that included 2 Fortune 500 legal departments and an embassy she was not permitted to name. She had an office with her name on the door. And then she had Dominic Marchetti, her business partner of 4 years. The man who had shaken her hand in a conference room in 2019 and said, with a sincerity she had no reason to question, "I have never met anyone who commands a room the way you do in 4 languages simultaneously. I want to build something with you." The man who spent the next 4 years very quietly building something, just not what he had told her. It unraveled in the spring of the previous year. A client had filed a complaint with the Texas Certification Board for court interpreters. Then another. Then a federal contractor audit flagged inconsistencies in billings traced back to the firm. By the time Amara understood the shape of what had happened, that Dominic had been falsifying interpretation records, inflating billing hours on federal contracts, and routing the difference through channels she had no visibility into, her name was already on every document that mattered, because her name was on the firm. Dominic cooperated with investigators. He offered a version of events in which Amara had approved the billing structures. He had emails, selectively forwarded, carefully stripped of context, that made it look plausible. She had a lawyer who told her the evidence was messy enough that fighting it would cost more than she had, and that the certification board would suspend her license regardless of the outcome while the investigation ran its course. She lost the firm. She lost the license. She lost the savings she had poured into the business. And she lost her father Emmanuel, not to the scandal but to a stroke he'd had 3 months before it all fell apart, a fact that the following year of professional and legal chaos had not given her adequate space to grieve. So Amara Osei, certified interpreter, fluent in 6 languages, former business owner, put on a white uniform and went invisible. She was good at it. She had always been good at making rooms comfortable, at reading people, at moving through spaces without friction. The Chateau Soleil job paid better than anything else she could get without her license, and Gerald, her manager, was the kind of man who asked few questions and valued quiet competence above credentials. She hadn't told anyone at work what she understood. Not because she was hiding it. Because it simply never came up. She was a server. Servers poured water and disappeared. Until tonight, when the water glass at table 17 had led her to the edge of a decision she had been moving toward without knowing it. She stood in the service corridor and listened to her own breathing. The indemnity clause is structured to reverse in their favor. This is not what was agreed. Gottfried Huber's German. Precise, professional, deeply concerned. A man raising a flag that nobody was translating. She already knew, even before she walked back toward that alcove, what she was going to do. She just needed one more pass to confirm it. She went back to table 17 with a breadbasket. It was the oldest trick in her own invisible playbook. Give yourself a reason to be there, take longer than necessary, and let the room forget you exist. She set the basket down near Gottfried's elbow, adjusted the small side plate that didn't need adjusting, and listened. Gottfried had regrouped. He was speaking again, careful German, the measured cadence of a man who was trying very hard to stay professional when what he wanted to do was stop the meeting entirely. He was addressing a specific section of the document open in front of G1. The indemnity reversal clause. He explained it clearly. Under the current language, if a third party in the supply chain defaulted within 18 months of the deal closing, the financial liability didn't distribute proportionally. It collapsed entirely onto the Asian investor's side of the agreement. He said it plainly. This is not what the term sheet reflected. This needs to be corrected before we can move forward. Marcus Devereaux listened to this with the attentive expression of a man taking in important information. Then he turned to Park Ji-won and said, in Korean, smooth, unhurried, not even bothering to lower his voice because why would he? There was no one in this room who mattered. That Gottfried was expressing enthusiasm about the timeline and that the Swiss legal team was fully aligned with the structure. Amara's hand on the breadbasket didn't tremble. She had learned how to hold things steady even when everything underneath her was moving. She walked away again. She put the basket down on the service station. She stood very still for the count of 7 seconds. This was the moment. She knew it the way you know certain things, not intellectually, not after deliberation, but in the chest, in the place below thought where decisions that define you actually get made. She could keep walking. She could finish her shift. She could go home to the apartment in Midtown where the box of her father's things still sat unopened in the corner of the bedroom because she hadn't been ready. And she could wake up tomorrow and pour water and be invisible and survive. Or she could stop surviving and start being herself. She thought about her father. Emmanuel Osei, who had worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant in Accra before they emigrated, who had learned English at 42 with the same ferocious discipline he had applied to everything in his life, who had sat in the front row of her college graduation with tears running openly down his face and hadn't once been embarrassed about it. Emmanuel, who, in the last real conversation she'd had with him before the stroke, had looked at her across his kitchen table and said, Amara, you are one of those people who was not made for the background. Stop standing in it. She straightened her uniform. She picked up a water pitcher that didn't need refilling. And she walked back into the alcove at table 17. She went directly to Park Ji-won. Not to Whitfield Crane. Not to Marcus Devereaux. To the man being deceived. She approached his side of the table with the measured calm of someone who had made a decision and was no longer afraid of it. She leaned forward slightly, not servile, not dramatic. Present. Mr. Park. I apologize for the interruption. I recognize that this is not my place. Every head at the table turned toward her with varying speeds. Whitfield Crane with mild confusion that was already shading into irritation. Marcus Devereaux very, very still, the particular stillness of a person whose calculation engine has just kicked into high gear. Gottfried Huber with an expression she couldn't fully read yet. And Park Ji-won, who simply looked at her. Not through her. At her. Waiting, with a quality of attention that she recognized immediately as the attention of a man who did not waste it. Your interpreter has not accurately translated a single concern Mr. Huber has raised in the last 15 minutes, Amara said. Her voice was even. Professional. Entirely calm. The Swiss attorney has raised a specific legal objection to the indemnity reversal clause. He says it deviates from the original term sheet and creates a concentrated liability risk entirely on your side of the agreement. He has stated clearly that he cannot recommend proceeding until the language is corrected. A pause. Mr. Devereaux told you he was enthusiastic about the timeline and that his team was fully aligned. The silence in the room had a texture to it. Thick, pressurized, the kind that forms when something true has been said in a room built around untrue things. Whitfield Crane was the first to speak. She's a server. The words were not quite contemptuous but were arranged in that direction. The clause in question, Amara said, still looking at G1, reverts financial liability upon third-party default within 18 months to the primary investor's side exclusively. Mr. Huber's exact words were that this is not what was reflected in the term sheet. Gottfried Huber had gone very still. He was watching her the way people watch something they had given up on expecting to see, with a specific raw relief of a man who has been speaking into silence and suddenly discovered the silence had ears. He spoke then, in German, directly and without hesitation. Everything she has said is precisely correct. Every word. Amara translated it before anyone asked. He says I'm correct. Every word. Park Ji-won had not moved. Had not changed expression. Had not done anything except look at her, with that complete, undiluted attention, from the moment she opened her mouth to this moment. Now he turned his head slowly toward Marcus Devereaux. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. There was something in the quality of that look that communicated everything necessary without requiring language at all. Marcus picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He looked once at Whitfield Crane, a look that contained an entire conversation about how they would debrief this later, how they would spin it, how they would rebuild. Then he walked out. Shin opened the private entrance door. It closed behind Marcus with a soft, final sound that seemed to compress the air. In the silence that followed, Park Ji-won looked down at the document on the table. Then he looked at Whitfield Crane with an expression so controlled and so complete that Crane, a man who had not visibly been uncomfortable in probably 3 decades, actually shifted in his seat. Amara took a step back. She had done what she came to do. More than done it, probably. She was almost certainly going to be fired, and she had made her peace with that somewhere between picking up the water pitcher and walking through that door. Some things cost what they cost. But as she turned to leave, Park Ji-won spoke. Korean, low and unhurried, not theatrical, not addressed to anyone in particular. The kind of thing a man says when he's said it to himself first and is only now deciding to say it aloud. Shin, near the door, heard it. Something in his posture shifted. Not much. The smallest adjustment. But she had learned to read small adjustments. Amara didn't catch the full meaning. But she felt it the way you feel a shift in air pressure before a storm. Not what it said, what it cost him to say it. She walked back out to the main floor. Gerald was waiting. His name was Gerald Fontaine, and in 8 months of working under him at Chateau Soleil, Amara had never once seen him sweat. Gerald prided himself on composure the way some men pride themselves on physical fitness, as discipline, as identity, as a thing that must be maintained daily or it would slip. He was sweating now. He walked her to his office with the speed of a man who needs walls around the conversation before it gets any larger. He closed the door, turned to face her, pressed 2 fingers to his temple. "Do you understand?" he said very quietly. "Who is sitting at table 17 right now?" "A man whose interpreter was lying to him," Amara said. Gerald stared at her for a long moment. "That is Park Ji-won." He said the name the way people say names that carry weight, not announcing it, but handling it carefully. "Do you understand what his presence in this building means? What a conversation that goes wrong in that room means for this establishment? For me." She understood more than he did, but she kept her face still and let him talk. "I have been in Houston hospitality for 19 years, Gerald said. "I have never, not once, had a floor staff member walk into a closed private dining engagement and insert themselves into a business conversation." His hands weren't fully steady. "You are exceptional at what you do, Amara. I want you to know I mean that without any qualification. But I cannot. There is no version of tonight where I have a choice." "I know," she said. He blinked. "You have to let me go. I understand that." He looked at her for a long moment, and beneath the professionalism and the controlled panic, she saw something genuine. Guilt, maybe. Or something adjacent to it. "I'm sorry," he said. And she believed him. She nodded once. Went to collect her things. Her colleague Danielle intercepted her at the staff lockers, eyes wide with the particular electric energy of someone who had witnessed something extraordinary and needed to process it through another person. "Amara, what happened in there?" Marcus Devereaux just walked out looking like he'd been hit by something, and Crane hasn't moved, and everyone is. "I'm going home," Amara said. She hugged Danielle quickly, genuinely. The kind of hug you give when you don't know the next time you'll be standing this close to someone. "Take care of yourself." She walked out. Houston received her the way it always did. Warm, sprawling, layered. The specific humid weight of a Gulf Coast night pressing down on everything like a hand. The street noise of downtown filtered up from below. Music from somewhere across the block. The city doing what cities do. Indifferent to the fact that Amara Osei had just walked out of the highest-paying job she'd had in 2 years with nothing lined up and her certification still suspended, and her father's unopened boxes still sitting in the corner of the apartment. She stood on the sidewalk and let herself feel it. All of it. The fear. The exhaustion. The grief that had never really had a proper season because the past 2 years hadn't offered one. And underneath all of that, stubborn and completely irrational, something that felt almost like being clean. Like she had handed back something she'd been carrying wrong. She had told the truth. Whatever came next, she had told the truth. She started walking toward the parking structure. She didn't notice the man behind her until she turned onto the second block. She caught him in a darkened shop window, a reflection, tall, unhurried, keeping a fixed distance of about 30 feet. Not rushing. Not slowing. Just maintaining. She turned left at the corner instead of right. Long route. He followed. Her pulse was calm in the way that pulses go calm under real threat, not because the fear wasn't there, but because fear had been rerouted into function. She was thinking fast. She was mapping the block. She was calculating. Then a second figure stepped out of a building entrance ahead of her and the calculation collapsed. She stopped walking. The two men closed the distance. Unhurried, almost casual, which was somehow more unsettling than aggression would have been. The one in front wore the settled expression of a man performing a familiar task. His hand moved toward his jacket. And then 2 other people arrived. There is no other way to describe it. They arrived the way shadows arrive, which is to say they were simply there when they hadn't been a moment before. What followed happened in under 40 seconds. No raised voices. No weapons visible. Just movement that was so precise and so complete that when it was over, the 2 men who had been following Amara were simply gone. Redirected. Removed with the efficiency of a solved equation. On the ground where the first man had been standing, a single white card. Thick stock. No name. Just a number. She picked it up. Looked at it for a moment. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She looked at the screen for 3 full seconds. She answered. Ms. Osei. The voice was measured, Korean-accented English, unhurried, the voice of a man who had decided exactly what he wanted to say before he dialed. Are you hurt? She exhaled through her nose. No. Good. A pause. Those men were sent by a man named Fletcher Cole. He works for Whitfield Crane. Crane identified you as someone who needed to be discouraged from speaking further about what you heard. Another pause. He will not have that opportunity again. Amara looked at the card in her hand. You had people watching me. I had people nearby, Ji-won said. The distinction matters. Does it? Yes, he said simply. It does. She pressed her lips together. The Houston night hummed around her. The drone of traffic on the freeway overpass, the distant bass from somewhere below, the hot humid air sitting on everything like a presence. Why? She asked. A silence longer than the others. And then, because, Park Ji-won said, people who tell the truth in rooms designed to punish them for it are very rare. And I find that I am no longer willing to lose them carelessly. She didn't have an answer for that. She stood on the sidewalk with the card in one hand and her phone in the other and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years, which was the specific sensation of being seen. There is a restaurant, he said. Korean. In the Midtown Gallery District. It's called Yun. You will not find it listed anywhere. A pause. Tomorrow evening. 7 o'clock. Another pause. Please. That last word. Please. It landed differently from everything before it, not as courtesy but as cost. Like a word he had to cross something to say, and he knew she should know that, and he wanted her to. I'll think about it, she said. She hung up before he could respond. Stood alone on the downtown Houston sidewalk with her heart doing things that didn't have names yet. Then she went to see her father's photograph on the nightstand. And she sat on the edge of her bed and thought about Emmanuel Osei, who had told her once, over instant coffee in a too-small kitchen, that the people worth knowing in life were the ones who surprised you by recognizing something in you that you had stopped showing the world. She looked at the card for a long time. Then she went to sleep. In the morning, A text arrived from an unknown number. Just an address in Midtown and a time. No greeting. She checked the address on every map app she had. Nothing. The street existed. The number existed. The restaurant did not, digitally, exist at all. She almost turned around twice on the drive over. Once on the highway, when the rational part of her brain, the part that had navigated fraud investigations and license suspensions and the specific humiliation of having your name become a cautionary story in professional circles, reminded her with perfect clarity that she was a woman with a suspended license, a depleted account, and no business walking voluntarily toward a man whose name made floor managers lose their composure. The second time was when she parked and sat in her car staring at an unmarked door in a building that looked like it could be anything. A private home. A meeting room. A quiet place where things got settled in ways that didn't require documentation. Then she thought of something her father would have said. She got out of the car. The door opened before she knocked. Of course it did. Shin stood aside without expression. She followed him down a corridor that smelled of barley tea and old cedar and opened, without warning, into a room that made her stop completely. It was not what she had expected. The Chateau Soleil had been opulent in the way that money performs itself, all clean lines and glass and curated spectacle. This was something entirely different. Low light from paper lanterns strung at varying heights. Dark wood walls. A long, single table set simply with 2 cups of tea already poured. Korean landscape ink paintings on 3 walls, the kind that take years to learn and longer to feel, not technically accomplished pictures but emotionally precise ones, the kind that understand what they're trying to say. The kind of room that belongs to someone who values things that can't be acquired quickly. Park Ji-won was already seated. He stood when she entered. That was the thing she hadn't expected. Not the room. Not even the absence of other people. That he stood. A man like him, in a room like this, standing for a woman who had been serving his table the night before. She held it in her chest and didn't react. He gestured to the seat across from him and didn't sit again until she had. Shin took his place near the far wall and became invisible. Ji-won looked at her across the table. In the warm lantern light, he seemed different from the private dining room. Still precise, still carrying that quality of complete internal stillness that seemed to be simply how he was built. But something in the professional armor was slightly lowered. Deliberately so. Like a man who had decided to let someone see one layer deeper than he usually permitted, and wanted her to understand it was a decision. He spoke in Korean. Shin translated from the wall, quiet and neutral as a piece of equipment. "You came. You asked," she said. Something moved briefly in his expression. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of where a smile would be, if he allowed it to arrive. "I ask many people many things. They don't always come. I'm not many people," she said. This time the suggestion got closer to the real thing before he controlled it back. He lifted his tea. Drank slowly. Set it down. "Tell me about yourself." She looked at him evenly. "You already know. You said as much on the phone last night, that you'd had someone look into my background." She held his gaze. "That's not a criticism. It's information I'd want you to have going forward, if there is a going forward. You should know that I am difficult to surprise in rooms with multiple languages." A pause. Shin's eyebrow moved a fraction. Ji-won looked at her steadily. "You understood what I said last night, at the end of the meeting." "Some of it," she said. "Not all. Korean isn't one of my 6. But I've spent enough time in rooms with enough languages to catch the emotional architecture of most of them, even when I miss the words." "You should have said that earlier. I'm saying it now. You should know it going forward." He looked at her for a moment. Then, in the measured cadence of a man who has done his research and is choosing to demonstrate it deliberately, he laid out what he knew. Her name. Her firm. Her license suspension. The investigation. Dominic Marchetti's cooperation with the board. The pattern. 2 other cities, 2 other schemes, similar structure. He said it without excess. Without cruelty. Just fact, laid on the table. And then, you took a service job to stay afloat. You have been surviving when you should have been working. The room was very quiet. She kept her face steady. It cost her something. Is there a point coming? Yes. He set down his tea. Looked at her directly. Not through the professional distance of a business arrangement, but with the specific clarity of a man making a real decision about a real thing. I want you to work for me. As my personal interpreter. Every negotiation, every contract review, every room where the difference between what is said and what is understood determines what happens next. A pause. After last night, I think you understand better than most people what that difference can cost. Clean. No performance around it. She looked at him for a moment. The lantern light moved between them. Somewhere outside, Midtown Houston carried on, oblivious, unbothered, enormous. I know what you are, Mr. Park, she said. Quiet. Careful. Not an accusation. Just the truth, placed on the table between them like the third cup of tea nobody had poured yet. He didn't flinch. Didn't redirect. Yes. My business is complicated. Some of it is legal, some of it is not, and all of it is mine. He held her gaze. What I am offering you is legitimate work. Documented. Properly compensated. You would interpret. Nothing else. And if I hear things I don't like? You heard things last night you didn't like, he said. You told the truth anyway. The almost smile again, warmer this time, closer. I'm counting on that. Not afraid of it. She looked down at her tea. She thought about the suspension notice still folded in her desk drawer at home. She thought about Dominic Marchetti, who had smiled at her across a conference table the morning everything fell apart. Easy, unbothered, the smile of a man who had already arranged whose name would absorb the damage. She thought about 2 years of understanding every word in every room and saying none of them, making herself invisible and small and survivable. She thought about Emmanuel Osei in the front row of her graduation, tears unashamed on his face, clapping like the whole thing was a miracle. Because to him it was. Because to him, she was. The work needs to be completely separate, she said slowly. Whatever else your organization does, I don't see it. I don't know about it. I don't touch it. I interpret negotiations and contracts only. Agreed. I set my own rate. Agreed. And if I ever hear something at one of your tables that I believe is dishonest or wrong, she looked up, I will tell you directly. The same way I did last night. No filter. No hesitation. Something changed in his face. Subtle and deep. The kind of change that happens at a level below performance, the kind that means something has landed somewhere real. Like a man who had genuinely stopped expecting to hear a particular thing and had just heard it. Agreed, he said. And on that third agreement, his voice was quieter than the first two. Like the word had gathered weight on its way to her. The room settled into a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The specific quality of silence that forms when two people have said something real and are giving it the space that real things deserve. Then Shin spoke from the wall. It was the first time he had volunteered words unprompted the entire evening. The tea has gone cold. Ji-won looked at him. Shin looked at the ceiling. And Amara Osei, for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, laughed. Genuine, unguarded, startled out of her by the sheer absurdity of the moment. A sound so natural it seemed to rearrange something in the room. Ji-won watched her laugh. And something in his expression, quiet, unplanned, briefly and completely undefended, was the most honest thing she had seen on his face since she walked in. He looked away first. Reached for his cold tea. We should discuss compensation, he said. His voice was slightly different. She noticed. She suspected he knew she noticed. Neither of them said anything about it. But the temperature in the room had changed. Warm and complex and full of things that didn't have names yet. Outside in the midtown night, Houston continued, vast and layered and completely unbothered. While inside Yun, over cold tea and careful words, something quiet and irrevocable began. 3 weeks after the night at Chateau Soleil, Amara Osei sat in a glass-walled meeting room on the 38th floor of a Houston office tower and translated a $62 million logistics infrastructure deal with the same quiet precision she had once used to carry water glasses across a private dining alcove. Different room. Different table. Same hands. Same voice. Completely different woman. The deal was between G1's holding group and a consortium of Texas-based port operators. Legitimate, cleanly structured, reviewed by a contract attorney G1 had brought in from Seoul specifically because, as Shin had conveyed to Amara without visible emotion, Mr. Park no longer uses translators he did not select himself. She had translated every word faithfully, every concern surfaced, every clause examined, every party understood. When it was done, the lead operator, a broad-shouldered man from Beaumont named Hargrove who had come in expecting to dictate the shape of the conversation, leaned back in his chair and said with something that sounded genuinely like respect, "Miss Osei, I have been doing deals in this industry for 25 years, and I don't think I have ever once felt that clearly understood by the other side of the table." Amara thanked him, gathered her notes. Across the room, G1 was exchanging final words with Hargrove near the door. But she felt his attention the way you feel weather, not seeing it exactly, just aware of it pressing against the room. She had been feeling it for 3 weeks. The room emptied. Assistants collected documents. Port operators filed out in clusters of relieved, energized conversation. G1 crossed to the window. Houston spread beneath them, the ship channel glinting silver in the late afternoon light, the massive flat sprawl of the city running in every direction toward the horizon. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, looking at it. "You did well today," he said without turning. "I did my job," she said. "Yes." A pause. "You always do." He turned from the window, looked at her across the empty room. "That is less common than it should be." She held her portfolio against her chest, kept everything she had been carrying for 3 weeks exactly where she had put it. Filed, managed, professionally maintained. "Was there something specific, Mr. Park?" He reached into his jacket, withdrew a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed, her name written across the front in precise handwriting she recognized. He crossed the room and held it out. She looked at it, looked at him. "What is this?" "Something I should have said differently the first time," he said. "Something I didn't have the right words for in English." Her heartbeat changed. She didn't acknowledge it. "You could have had Shin translate." "No," he said simply. "I couldn't." She took the envelope. Their hands didn't touch. The gap of air between them as she took it felt like something physical, like pressure, like weather, like a door at the exact moment before it opens. She looked up. He was close enough that she could see the quality of his attention clearly, that complete, unguarded focus he gave her when he thought she wasn't looking, except she was always looking, had been looking for 3 weeks, and pretending otherwise with decreasing success. Amara. The way he said her name. Every single time. Like he had decided which syllable carried the weight before he started speaking. She took 1 step back. 1 step. Necessary. "I'll read it," she said. "Later." Something in his expression, just briefly, just a flash, was so unguarded it nearly undid 3 weeks of careful professional distance. Not hurt exactly. More like a man who had extended something real and was holding himself very still to see what happened to it. He nodded, stepped back to give her space. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. She couldn't quite trust her face in his direction, so she didn't turn around. "Thank you," she said. "For today." The deal was fair. Both sides left with what they came for. A pause. "That matters," he said, quietly. "It matters more than you know. That you make it so." She left. The elevator down was 38 floors of her standing very still, the envelope in both hands, not opening it. The lobby. The revolving door. The warm evening air of Houston. She walked half a block and stopped under an oak tree whose roots had cracked the sidewalk wide open and kept growing anyway. Very Houston, she thought. Very exactly, Houston. She opened the envelope. One card inside. Cream thick. His handwriting. 4 words in Korean. She read them slowly. Her lips moved slightly. The translation assembled itself in her mind with the automatic ease of someone who has lived inside language long enough that it stops being translation and becomes simply knowing. 4 words. Her eyes closed. Somewhere nearby, a street musician was playing something low and patient on a saxophone. Not performing, just playing, the way some music exists only because it needs to exist, not because anyone is watching. Her phone rang. She knew before she looked. Knew it the way she knew things that had stopped being surprises and become something else. She answered. Silence first, just the soft, present weight of him on the other end of the line. She had learned the texture of his silences over 3 weeks. This one was different from all the others. Quieter. More exposed. The silence of a man who has said the thing and is waiting. You read it, he said. Not a question. He always knew. She looked up at the Houston skyline. The city enormous and contradictory and beautiful, holding every version of itself simultaneously without apology. G1. His name in her mouth for the first time. She heard the exact moment it registered, the almost imperceptible change in his breathing on the other end of the line. First time, he said. He knew it was. You can't write things like this, she said softly. Not to me. A silence, long, full, trembling with everything neither of them had said across 3 weeks of professional distance and careful restraint and coffee that was always exactly right. I know, he said, his voice lower than she had ever heard it. The armor entirely absent. Just a man who had written 4 words in his language because English didn't hold what he needed them to hold. Then why did you? She whispered. The saxophone hit a note so clean it almost hurt. Because, he said, I have been in every kind of difficult room there is. Rooms with lawyers. Rooms where the wrong word ends everything. Rooms where I have had to be the most controlled person in the space because no one else was going to be. A pause long enough that she counted her own heartbeats in it. And I have never once been as afraid as I am right now. The oak tree moved above her. The saxophone breathed. Houston held them both inside itself without knowing it. Amara pressed her lips together. Looked at the 4 words in her hand. Felt the exact shape of what was in front of her. What it would cost, what it would change, what it would ask of her to step into with no guarantee of anything except that it was real. Whatever this was, it was real. She folded the card slowly. Put it in her pocket, against her heartbeat. I'm going to go home, she said finally. And I'm going to sit with this. A pause. I know. She hung up. Stood under the oak tree on the cracked Houston sidewalk with one hand pressed flat against the pocket where the card was. 4 Korean words warming through the fabric against her palm. Then she started walking. And if there was something in her step that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago when she walked out of Chateau Soleil with nothing and everything at the same time, well, Houston was full of stories. Always had been. This one was just beginning. If you made it this far, you already know this story isn't done. Amara has 4 Korean words in her pocket. If you want part 2, where their worlds fully collide, where someone from her past comes back with a very specific agenda, and where Amara has to decide exactly how much of herself she's willing to risk for something real, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Tell me what you think those 4 Korean words said. The most interesting answer gets pinned. Subscribe if you haven't already. New story every week. I'll see you in part 2.